Welcome, everyone. I am here with Patricia and Kesenya. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're getting ready for our Stars Over Egypt tour with Patricia, who's joining us from Egypt to tell us today. We're going to just touch on one of the many exciting, amazing, profound destinations that we have planned for the Stars Over Egypt tour this November. So thank you, Patricia, for making the time to share a little bit today.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. And yeah, Abydos, wow. Yeah, I mentioned which one. Abydos is absolutely incredible. And I just wanted to, point out that every tour, people ask me what my favorite site is, since we're only choosing one. And, I do have a few that I'm, very close to my heart. And Abydos is one of them, but I always say it's the site I'm in because every single site is a part of the story, and it's a part of the spiritual journey that you're on when you come to Egypt. Each place was chosen for the place, the energy, the earth energies that existed there. And it has a relationship for what the structure and the symbolism embodies. So yeah, we're going to focus on Abydos today, but keep in mind, it's only part of the story. There's so much to experience. And I'm so looking forward to doing it with both of you because we each bring so many different aspects to the story. That's what alchemy really is bringing all the separated aspects together. And I love to work with different people, and working with you is something I've wanted to do for so long because I'm just getting to know you, and your wealth that you were helping me even figure out a few things I was thinking about the last time we did a podcast. And David, I've been following your work for years because of the way you see the stars and the connections to the world's mythologies. And to experience that in Egypt is huge. So yeah, I'm very excited.
Well, we're so excited, and it's time for people to kind of commit to it since it's coming up in November,
It's not
and
far away.
it's really exciting. Stars Over Egypt, because of course I'll be pointing out constellations and relating to the myth, the various myths of the world, but specifically Egypt, and
And I'll
some
be
of the
talking, oh,
yeah,
sorry.
and some of the artwork that we'll be seeing there, as well as some today. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'll be talking about astrology. I mean, most astrology came out of Egypt, and there's just such a rich foundation there too. So we'll be exploring the astrology of every day that we're on the tour, and learning heaps about where it comes from and why we use it the way we do. So I'm very excited to share that as well.
And Patricia, you're our master guide who has the whole plan of where we're going to be. And so today we're going to just touch on Abydos. Tell us when on the tour is Abydos? Is it
Well,
early?
we start off at the Giza. Everyone needs to see the pyramids, and we used to like to take people right to Upper Egypt, and some of my speakers like to do that. But I liked, people come all the way to Egypt. Many of you haven't been there. You want to see the pyramids and the Sphinx. So we'll start in Giza. I think we go to Saqqara, there's just so much to experience. Then we go to Upper Egypt, and we'll start off in Luxor. And Luxor was a hub. It was a it yeah the Temple of Karnak is second only to Angkor Wat in Cambodia to its size for a religious structure. And what each one of these places embodies is so profound. So we'll go to Luxor, and Abydos is on our list of the days that when we get to Luxor, we're going to see Dendera, we're going to see the West Bank, we're going to go to Abydos. And these are our day trips. Most tours actually go to Abydos and Dendera in the same day, and I can't even imagine doing that because you lose so much. And when we go to Abydos, we are going to not only see the incredible Seti I temple, but we're going to go to the ancient Osirion behind. They've closed that to the public now, so we have a private. We're actually going to go down into the Osirion, And in a few moments, during this podcast, I'm going to talk to you about how amazing and significant this is. That place was considered the most powerful place in Egypt at one time. And Abydos itself was a place of pilgrimage. Every Egyptian wanted to make their way to Abydos because of what it holds. And part of that is the energy of the ancestors. The pre-dynastic and early dynastic pharaohs were said to have been buried. Many of them were buried. Well, they were buried in this area. And that recognition and reverence for their ancestors had to do with the level of consciousness that those people, this was us at a time when we were at our highest state of consciousness. And that's what they're revering. They're remembering who we can be, and remembering how we can become that again. And that's what Egypt was all about.
Wow, it's so powerful. I'm so excited, and I can't wait to go ahead.
Can I ask a question, Patricia? I've had a client or two of mine who are very interested in coming along, just express concern about the safety of traveling to Egypt at the moment. Could you just speak to that for a second?
Well, what's interesting that firstly, I've been living in Egypt for going on 16 years. It'll be 16 years in November. So that's a long time. Been coming to Egypt for 20 years. But at any rate, I wouldn't live here if Egypt wasn't safe. I was here during what they now call the uprising, but it was we called it the revolution, which totally changed the structure and the energy of the culture here. Back in 2011, I came to live here in 2008. We have been through so many different experiences with our neighbors, having incidents and battles and things like that. Nothing ever touches Egypt. Egypt is strong. They have a strong military. I've been running tours all the way through all of these years. We started right away in 20, actually it was later. We have people coming in 2011. We have people here during the revolution. We have people coming, the next few years. We had lots of groups coming. I've been leading groups every year, even through the pandemic. People hopped on a plane to come to Egypt. And every tour has been magnificent. Nobody said, oh, it's not safe here. In fact, a lot of people are shocked, if they get here because their friends and family say, oh, you can't go. My friends and family, when I first came in 2005, said, you can't go, Patricia. When you're called to Egypt, you come. And the good news is it is safe on the ground. It is safe now. And I feel safe anywhere in Egypt. I go anywhere by myself, day or night. I live alone. I love the energy here, the power here, and the people here are so heart-centered. So I would say, is anywhere in the world safe? Nobody can make that statement. There are things happening in every country in the world. What I see here is we don't see the kind of violent crime that you see in other countries. And I think, this has to do with the energy of the people and their belief systems. There's petty theft. We tell people to keep their wallets, don't be running around with money in your hands. That's anywhere in the world, but no, it's definitely, in my opinion, very safe to be here. You just use common sense.
Thank you for addressing
we
that.
wouldn't be going if we didn't feel that it was going to be safe and just a really wonderful, special time. So
that's right. And before we launch in, if we had to postpone it because of, some
anything can happen. Yeah.
We would have to postpone it. But what are some of the changes what are some of the reasons why we want to try and make it happen this November? Because I know they're making some changes on access to the Giza Plateau, some changes to the way the museum is structured. What will
there's benefits to coming now, isn't
what's going
there?
to change that we want to be able to say back then?
I'm glad you brought that up, Dave, because we talked about this, and and I've been saying this for years, that the best time to come to Egypt is during crazy times. that other people are afraid to come, because you get to experience the sites in ways that you would never, and the one thing that David's referring to now is the Grand Egyptian Museum. They call it the Gem. Has, they've been threatening to open it. We've been waiting with bated breath, hoping they'll open it for several years now, and they haven't. And there's a lot of reasons for that behind the scenes. But when they open the new Gem Museum, everything is going to change here. Tourism will flood back because this museum is going to be iconic. It'll be the largest museum in the world. That is wonderful. And a lot of people want to see it. And, I'll be first in line. I mean, I've been there, but you can't get into the main galleries, only into different areas. So, we're all waiting to get in. But once that happens, the flood of tourists will be here. And it will not be the same, because I've been at the sites when I was the only one there. I've been at Karnak when I was the only one there, and it's magical. And when there's fewer tourists at the sites, you get to experience them, and we've had this, the whole time I've been here, we've only had a few times when suddenly, like right after the pandemic, everybody wanted to travel. And we had, when you're on the cruise ships, you have to travel through like 10 boats to get to the shore, this kind of thing. And then you get to the temple and everybody's crowded in, that, all the different groups have, your guide has a flag, so where you can't make your way. And how do you feel the sight? How can you see the depictions when there's so many heads in front of you? And then the energy, of course, you're not going to feel the same. So, even the Giza Plateau, there are times, there are certain days I don't go because I know it's going to be flooded with people, and it takes away from your experience. So yeah, I would tell everybody, get to Egypt now before the museum opens. Come back when it's open. You can spend a whole week at it. I'm sure we could spend a whole week at the current museum. But come to Egypt when you can actually navigate and experience it in all its glory.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Let me just share my screen with a couple of slides that I had, just as kind of a lead in, and then I'll hand it over to Patricia to really whet our appetite for the Osirion and the temple and the Abydos sites. Just a taste to pique everybody's interest. I just thought it would be helpful to pop up this map of Abydos, the temple from Seti I, who was, like you said, 19th dynasty, but there are kings and pharaohs from the 1st through 4th dynasties buried in the same areas. And I just thought this would give a little bit of a framework. The chapels at the very top right are where the Isis and Horus and Osiris chapels, they're called, are up in the very top right corner. But you can see the north seeking arrow and the orientation of the Nile from this diagram from, I don't know, 1910 or something. And then I found another one and put it to scale. There's the Osirion. And it's curious that Abydos has this L shape. Did they know that the Osirion was there and it was way older, and they decided not to, intrude upon it and took a left turn? I don't know if you want to speak to that, Patricia, but I just thought it'd be fun to put the diagram up.
You're absolutely right. I'll just say something quickly. The Osirion is absolutely much older than Seti I. And we have proof actually that one of the early, one of the early pharaohs was there. I think it was from the Kesenya Moore, from the 2nd dynasty or 3rd dynasty. And the whole site of Abydos is even dated back to pre-dynastic times. But about the Osirion, it's several levels. It's much lower than the Seti I temple. They had to dig it out. It was in a terrible state of disrepair. And the blocks used are megalithic, doesn't describe it. They are huge, and we, people come and study this because how did they get these blocks here? These blocks came from all over Egypt. And it's just incredible. And we also have people working. I've been on in a group that is doing a lot of research. There's interesting water anomalies. Underneath that structure, there is what they call ancestral water. And this is water that sort of lies in pockets and it's hugely significant. And there are people out there that study this, like Maria Wheatley, that talks about when you have pockets of ancestral water, these are power places. And this is underneath the Osirion, and that water comes from different places. And one side of the structure has a different temperature than the other side of the structure. It's different than the water that's under the Osireion Temple, which does have water underneath it, moving water. So there's so much. Like I said, the site is chosen for its energetic properties. The Osirion, Abdel Hakim Awyan, who was a knowledge holder, indigenous knowledge holder here in Egypt, he said that this could be tens of thousands of years old. And when you see it with your own eyes, and if you come and experience it with us and get 2 hours of private time within this structure, you'll begin to understand the depth of what it represents. I'm going to go into that a little bit in a moment. Sorry, I sort of just kept
That's
going.
beautiful. I'm glad that's I just wanted to put the map up and see what would come out of it. So that's fantastic. Yeah, so I just labeled that's the Osirion relative to the Seti Temple at Abydos. So I'm going to turn it over to you in just a moment, but I was going through just to see, is there some artwork that I could maybe mention connections to the stars? And what I actually zeroed in on, this is from a book from 1933, and it has all these basically hand-drawn preservation and mapping out of some of the different wall paintings and ceiling paintings at Abydos. And like I said, this particular volume, one volume was entirely devoted to the Osiris chapel, and another volume to the Isis chapel, another volume to the Horus chapel. This is from the Osiris Temple chapel, just in that little upper right corner of the map that we showed earlier. Unfortunately, the beautiful full color painted plates didn't get, they show this beautiful bark. There's many of these different fantastic divine barks or boats with the gods on them. And the painter chose in this book to do the right half of the wall and not the left half. But on the left half, you've got Seti in front of Osiris, and he's holding, that's Seti is wearing he's got the royal uraeus on his forehead, and then there's Osiris and the goddess to the left. But what I zeroed in on was, this is one of the depictions of holding papyrus and lotus. And I had just done a video talking about these scenes of so-called uniting of Upper and Lower Egypt. And I said in my video, they always try and make it out to be a political, this is political reuniting Egypt again after the intermediate period or whatever. And as we were just talking with Patricia before, no, it's esoteric, it's profound, it's talking about something far more than the political or economic uniting of Upper and Lower Egypt as we're always taught. And I did a whole video showing it's also reflecting the stars, the turning of the heavens, which has profound significance. And I pointed out the uniting scenes, this churning scene. This is from Abydos again. That's the king in between two goddesses. And on either side, we have two different gods. One on the left, as we're looking at it, is a Horus-headed god, and on the right is a Thoth-headed, ibis-headed god. So Thoth and Horus, or Jehudi and Horus, but they're holding stalks of papyrus going down to this central pivot. Well, on one side, the left, as we look at it, those are papyrus, and on the right, those are lotus. And I'll let you, Patricia, take it in a moment. But just last weekend, Kesenya took me down to Melbourne. It was a surprise. I didn't even know what we were going to see. And we walked into the National, what's it called? The National
Gallery of Victoria.
The National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne. And it was the Pharaoh exhibit from pieces from the British Museum. And this is a throne attributed to the time of Senusret III. And it's the same, it's that same scene. This is from a much earlier time, or attributed to a much earlier time. And in this case, I did a whole video about this, so people can go check that out. But this one has the god Hapi on both sides, kind of a twinned Hapi on both sides, and the hieroglyphs are even mirrored if you look up at the top closely. But I really was intrigued as I was talking about it with the papyrus on one side, again on the left, and the lotus on the other side. That's the papyrus, which is, like I said, people try and turn this into only, oh, it's just uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. And of course, it's much more than that. It's also a celestial scene. And I talked about evidence that it's a celestial scene, but they're almost twins, but not quite, because on one side it's papyrus growing out of Hapi's head, and on the other side it's lotus. And I showed some, again, beautiful plates from, I think this was a book from 1915, papyrus and lotus. That's just what we saw in that scene at Abydos, and maybe we'll be able to see it. As you were saying, Patricia, sometimes these plates preserve things that we're fortunate to have these plates from the late 1800s and early 1900s because of what has happened in the 20th century with different things. So I just wanted to point that out. This is a celestial scene. I talk about that in that video. Beyond any doubt, it's celestial, but it's also, they weren't just, oh, this is a fun kind of intellectual exercise to mirror the heavens. They were doing profound things.
What is it representing esoterically? Do you want
Well, first I'd like to know what it represents in the heavens, because this scene is called the Sima Tawi. And it is, what it's uniting, of course, is the two hemispheres of the brain, the right and left brain consciousness, to come back to center. But it also represents your nail. It represents the the whole thing. The bottom is the lungs. What they have their feet on is the lungs. This is the is it the larynx? No, the voice box, and you have the lungs are the lotus and the papyrus, and the bottom is well, also is the lungs, the heart, but it represents the windpipe. Thank you. Thank you. The windpipe, and then the top is your voice box. And the Tawi, of course, represents, is basically bringing this idea of the Taurus and Taurus as a constellation, because the voice box is ruled by Taurus. And that's Taurus rules, of course, the voice and tone. So it's all about that idea of Taurus is the separation, but it also, if you almost flip it, Scorpio represents the coming back into center. It's a very interesting dynamic. And I have to say, David, too, that oftentimes these things have multiple representations. Horus can be Mars, he can be the sun, he can be Sirius, in different understandings of what he represents. So there's never just one mirror to the things that we're looking at. This is huge to understand, and that every symbol has at least 7 layers of meaning. And that can be related to the chakras. If you're in your lower root chakra, you might take things at face value. But as you begin to raise your levels of consciousness, you begin to see the dimension of what things represent, if that helps. So anyway, just quickly, if you could say what this represents, I'd be very interested.
Multi-layered, and I agree that, when I talk about the any particular myth, the Bible being based on the stars, but it's also relating to the human body, and the stars and the planets were known to have connections to the human body, like Jupiter to the liver. And that's so interesting that you mentioned Taurus, because that connects to all your knowledge about astrology and
That's right,
how the
the
body
voice.
is connected to the 12 zodiac signs go through the body. And it's a lot of what you talk about in readings.
That's
And
right.
so I'll close out with a quick interpretation or explanation of what I was getting at in that video. So in that video, I was talking about primarily something that you touched on already, Patricia, that this is a worldwide system. These representations are found around the world. It's part of an ancient knowledge. And you mentioned when you were talking about the Karnak temple, you briefly said Karnak and Angkor Wat are these largest religious compounds. Well, when I saw this in the Melbourne Museum, I was so excited. I said, oh, I want to talk about that, because this particular scene, the authors of Hamlet's Mill make a very strong case, and I agree with them, that this is related to the churning scenes, churning of the ocean of milk that are found at Angkor Wat and in ancient texts from the Sanskrit texts of ancient India. They're found in the Vishnu Purana, is where it's, and I basically from here switched over to the churning of the ocean of milk to prove a connection to the constellation Ophiuchus. There's no doubt in my mind that Ophiuchus is connected to this scene, and Ophiuchus is a pivot. Ophiuchus functions as a pivot between higher consciousness and the zodiac line, or the ecliptic path of the sun that the sun and the planets and the moon go through, have to do with our earthly existence in time. When we come into this time, when we come into time out of eternity, we take on all these different astrological, we have gifts from Mars or gifts from Jupiter, or gifts from Saturn. And you may say, oh, thank you for that gift. No, it's something I have to struggle with and work with. We all have challenges in this life, and it's all related to coming into time. But Ophiuchus is in the zodiac, or the path of the ecliptic goes through the foot of Ophiuchus, but Ophiuchus is hidden, excluded, and slightly above, and connected with that path of the Milky Way. And the churning of the ocean of milk is because it's along that path as well. But Ophiuchus is this pivot, and I use the term pivot literally, like that nail. And Ophiuchus has a lotus growing out of one side and a papyrus growing out of the other side. I explained that in the video, but Ophiuchus is a pivotal figure that unites or connects. It shows that even though we're here in time, we have connection with eternal, timeless, the eternal. Ophiuchus is that pivot. So this is, like you said, the uniting of left and right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is very particular, grabbing out, labeling things, just like a cobra. I think it was Schwaller de Lubitsch who said the cobra is the one that discerns and decides strike or not strike. And when I strike, will I strike your, leg? Will I strike your toe? That's discernment. And then the vulture is assimilation or digestion. I think this was Schwaller.
Exactly. Yes.
They were uniting it on their very crown. Well, that absorption, assimilation, comprehensiveness, that's the other hemisphere. That's the part that doesn't even use words. It uses connection to the whole universe. Anyway, this is the uniting. Ophiuchus is the uniter in the heavens, as well as, anyway, I guess I've said enough on that. That's it.
100%. You're right on the money. And they do have Ophiuchus there as the serpent bearer that you see him in different places all over the world. but he has the serpent head and he carries the serpents. And of course, Ophiuchus comes around the time of Scorpio, so it makes sense. It's that altering, that place of interdimensionality that happens when you do combine the two hemispheres of the brain. So beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Yes, thank you. And I'm gonna that was my last slide. I'm gonna turn it over to you. But oh yeah, just since you mentioned Scorpio, the foot of Ophiuchus does come down to touch the ecliptic right between.
It's around the galactic center in tropical astrology, actually around sort of 20 to 26 degrees. So what that is it's about the end of Scorpio, the beginning of Sagittarius in sidereal astrology, which
in the sky it is between those two, and you're right by the galactic center.
Scorpio and Sagittarius, yes, exactly. So
yeah,
it makes sense. And diametrically opposed as well to Orion, which is Osiris, and he's basically the one that's on the hero's journey. And when he transforms into Horus, the ascended Osiris, Horus is also identified often with Ophiuchus. Of course, there you have your this diametrically opposed idea. Horus's Egyptian original name, Horus, the name, the title, is a Greek rendition of his original name, which was Hebrew, our hero on the hero's journey. There are no accidents. It's just amazing. So that is what we're all striving for. That's our quest, is to transmute our polarity, to find that center place between the two hemispheres of the brain, and then we walk through these interdimensional gateways into higher consciousness. So yeah, great stuff.
I love it. I can't wait to hear what you have to share about Abydos, Patricia.
Well, it's all related to everything you talked about, David. I'll share my screen. There we go. Okay, I just wanted to include the top of our poster for our tour, and the dates are, of course, from November 12th to the 25th of this year. It's the perfect time to come to Egypt. The weather is beautiful. It's cool during the days, cooler during the days. It's still sunny and gorgeous, but not as hot. Like right now, it's like, now I always use Fahrenheit, but it's like 106 degrees outside. So you don't want to come in the summer, you want to come in the fall. And November is what I consider to be the best month of the year to come. So yeah, you don't want to miss. You do want to reserve your place to come, because there's so much to experience on this incredible tour. So I put two pictures here just to show you the interior and how magical it is. They have these, openings in the ceiling at different places where you can see these rays of light coming through, and they come through at different angles during the day, and that holds a different archetypal energy. So people like to bathe in them, and it's really quite powerful. And that's something we'll talk about at the site, but it's really, I would have thought, no, that's ridiculous. And then when you experience it at the site, it's so powerful. And there was a method to their madness for sure. Now, I included this because people often relate Abydos to the helicopter and the submarine and the rocket ship. And I don't like to burst bubbles, but it's an amazing explanation when you fully understand it. And these are some of the things we'll talk about at the sites. They did have capabilities. The very ancients in Egypt had incredible capabilities, to create megalithic structures and carry stones that weighed, tons and tons, obelisks and big megalithic stones. They built the pyramids. Something, by the way, we can't do today. These are the things we'll discuss. But here we're actually looking at, we also want to talk about, the dynastic Egyptians also had great capabilities. But in this case, we don't think they actually envisioned our world, or they actually had rocket ships and spaceships. in the way we look at things is they knew how to harness the forces of nature to create magic, miracles, things we would call miracles and supernatural today. Did they need helicopters? I mean, in Australia, don't they just jump in the song lines? They had capabilities of doing things that we can't even imagine. And I don't think, you know, in my opinion, they needed vehicles or machines, explosive energies. I think they utilized implosive energies that were in sync with nature's currents and cycles. So in this case, you going to say something, Kesenya?
Vibrational change is what they harnessed. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. There are currents. There's so many currents, earth energies, earth currents, currents in, you know, that, you know, even the air, the flow of water, the sun's light, and they knew ways to basically harness that energy, that incredible energy, to do things, like I said, that we can't imagine, because with our limited senses, we don't even see these energies. Many people say, I can't, you know, I take people to portals. There are portals at these sites where you can feel the energy emanating from the earth. Some people say, I can't feel it. Of course, later they'll have these crazy dreams and they'll tell me all these stories. And many people are beginning to feel these energies. And it's so exciting to see that, you know, that their faces light up and say, oh my gosh. Or people just go to a place and they come back and they're like, oh my, you know, they had those moments of experiencing 0 point energy. And this is what these structures were doing. They were harnessing earth currents to create, you know, an interdimensional atmosphere that we can interact with and utilize to raise our levels of consciousness. Hakeem would say each site was tuned to a specific archetypal energy that would awaken a sense within you. And understanding how that works is part of that process. But anyway, I just wanted to point this out, that this is considered an example of palimpsest. And that's when, you know, a later artisan would come and literally imprint another writing on top of the old writing. Sometimes they would, you know, use gesso or something and wipe out what was there and then put their own writing in. So it's an example of two different writings that were on top of each other. And we come up with this crazy thing that looks like a helicopter and it looks like a helicopter. I won't deny it. I was excited the very first time I saw it, but after years of study, it's like, oh, darn. And underneath that, I show you the two names. Seti the First is the one who built the temple originally. And then the actual front of the temple, which is where this room is, Ramses started to do the structure at the very front, and he came in, and Ramses is his son. He came in, and, you know, people would say, look at that. He just put, and on the right image, you can actually see the writing is indented on top of this really beautiful writing that comes forward, you know, that bas relief. And it's so, you know, it's so much harder to do that earlier form of writing than what you see with Ramses just cutting into the stone to say, you know, this is me, this is my temple.
He put his name on everything, didn't he?
He did. And it is kind of funny because you'll see his name on statues everywhere that are quite obviously not him. But I always like to remind people that this wasn't Ramses himself. This is always the priesthood. They were the power behind the throne that were inputting these images. And when you understand that we're moving from ages, you know, like when you're moving from the age of Taurus into the age of Aries, this is when we start to see the ram road or the ram-headed sphinxes. And Ramses, all the titles of the pharaoh become the Ramses, and it's all about Ra and Ramses. You know, they understood as we move through the ages, the symbolism, the archetypal energies change as we precess, you know, through the great year. Yeah. But we're not going to take the time to discuss that today. So
We'll talk about it there.
yeah, we will talk about it there quite often. I think we'll have some pretty amazing discussions. So I wanted to point out that this particular temple, the Seti First Temple, probably has the most beautiful artistry of depictions. It's just absolutely incredible. And very quickly, I want to mention that Seti I was a king, a pharaoh. It was after, he came in after, the lineage of pharaohs had stopped, and he was basically coming from the military. And suddenly he's 19th dynasty. And those of you familiar with the dynastic associations, the 18th dynasty was the whole Akhenaten debacle. How they would view it, the priests would have viewed it. But at any rate, the priests came in and they basically dethroned Akhenaten. Suddenly it's Tutankhamun, and then Tutankhamun dies, and it was just, the lineage was broken, the bloodline stopped there, and suddenly Seti I comes from the military and he's pharaoh. So he has to prove that he has the right to rule. And part of this, what we see at Abydos, are depictions of a ceremony that the pharaohs would go through at a certain point in their reign, after about 33 years of rulership. They had to do these ceremonies, and it was called the Hebset Festival, in order to prove they had the right to rule. And as David said, the Sima Tawi was part of that understanding of part of what the pharaoh was doing is uniting, according to the priests, uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. And that's really symbolic of bringing chaos back into, it's basically just, bringing the chaos of a rulership that's suddenly gotten old and making it calm again and peaceful again. And this proves he has the right to rule. But on a much deeper esoteric level, we're talking about, again, transmuting the two hemispheres of the brain, the conflict of our own duality, and coming back to center. And this is basically our highest state of consciousness. And so what I'm showing you here is a really famous image on the far left of the raising of the Jed pillar, and that's Seti I and Isis. And the Jed is said to be the backbone of Osiris on this hero's journey, and he's fallen out of balance. I'm going to show you a slide in a moment that shows you that Jed pillar, the spine of Osiris, is exactly 23.5 degrees out of balance.
Wow.
And of course, that's relating to the axis of the Earth. So again, we're going to have so much fun on this tour, because we're going to talk about this being a huge dynamic as we process through the ages and stages of consciousness in the Great Year Cycle.
And think about what Patricia just said, 23.5. So they knew the tilt of our axis and incorporated it into the backbone of Osiris that is tilted at that Jed column, that gold pillar with the horizontal backbone vertebrates on it that you're pointing to, is exactly 23.5 off, huh?
That's right. And it's not the only place we'll see that. I will point this out to you everywhere, including on the Dendera zodiac, when Osiris takes his first step.
Yeah, I can't see that in person. And
it's incredible that the history, the heritage, everyone's heritage on Earth is represented in the structure, symbolism, and mythology of ancient Egypt. So we're going to have so much fun. So there's your two serpents from the Sima Tawi. If you look to the far right, another very well-known image of Thoth, Jehuti, holding those two staffs that basically represent not only the two hemispheres of the brain. You see the red crown and the white crown. The white looks gold, but that's how they would depict it. They didn't use white paint. And then it's the lotus and papyrus. Can you see that? So it's not only this energy, but it's our Kundalini energy. It's so much more. So this is all about raising our own Kundalini energy to find that moment of complete oneness, that complete state of higher consciousness. And why do they do this? Because they're telling us at some point during this hero's journey, we do experience that moment. This is what it's all about. This is what we're all on that quest for, on our own hero's journey. We're going to see so much throughout Egypt that speaks to this. So here I show you that 23.5-degree angle, and how it's actually raised to that place that the axis of the earth can actually come back to center. And quickly I'll point out, how does that happen? Well, we're spinning. The earth is spinning. And we have this amazing magnetic field that, keeps us in this, state of protection. But when that magnetic field starts to weaken, and that magnetic field is the veil of Isis. Again, I'm just giving you little teasers. We will talk so much more. As the magnetic field thins, and it is thinning exponentially right now. So this is that moment. It's basically about 25 to 30% weaker than it was 160 years ago. And you guys can look this stuff up. This is science. But at any rate, as it weakens, the earth will slowly stop spinning for a moment of silence, and we will be pointed toward our ecliptic pole for a brief moment. And this is sort of relating to the rituals that the kings would go through. But again, we don't have the time to go through all that now, but it has to do with having a near-death experience. And becoming one with everything that exists, that moment of complete bliss and knowing. I call it the moment of gnosis. And here I show you just an image to show you the two serpents and the rising Kundalini. And there you have the wings, the winged Horus, right? That represents that moment in our pineal when we feel that 0 point, that centeredness. We've come back to our heart and we remember who we are. We the veil has thinned. We see through the veil drops, and we know who we are, and our connection to everything that is in the universe. And this was on the boat, the Neshmet boat that you showed, David, in your slides, and I'll show that to you in a moment. It's funny how connected what we're talking about here is.
Planned this before, but it's so
so amazing. So this is the image now. It goes through these transformations, and you see the head of Osiris at the top, and this is called the fetish of Osiris. And it's the vertical. That's when that 23.5 degrees becomes vertical, points to our ecliptic pole, our place of center. We are centered. We have come back to the heart of consciousness. And what's interesting is, see the two figures at the bottom? And I also relate this to the churning of the milk. It's so funny how close we are in what we see, David. And I've talked about this in my podcast. It is this idea of the churning of the milk. And what's interesting about churning the milk, I met a gal in India that talked about this, that you don't churn the milk in circular patterns. You pull it one way in the old butter churns, and then you pull it the other way. So it's sort of like moving from left brain consciousness to right brain consciousness and having moments of complete centeredness, moments of silence in between. Just beautiful. And of course, on the other side of this particular chamber, which is called the Osiris chamber, of course, we see Horus on the pedestal. It is a papyrus pillar. And he's wearing the double crown, and he is the hero. This is the accomplishment of literally this moment that they call Un, and it's where we get our word noon. It's that giving birth to divinity. We suddenly know that we are the gods that walk the earth, right?
Yeah, I love that.
Isn't it beautiful?
So beautiful. Oh, wow. Lovely.
Isn't it amazing? You know, that our imagery all relates and mirrors what the ancients understood, and it helps us to unravel the clues to what we're looking at. You know, the first time I saw these images, I didn't know all the stories. It took years of research, you know, just like David has done with the stars. And I love that we both came to the same conclusions.
So
It's
wonderful.
magical.
We're gonna be sharing so much, and everyone who comes from us, we just
Exactly.
there's so much to share. The I was going to say about, and we can get into it when we're on the tour itself, but the symbol of Hermes, of course, Hermes and Thoth, Jehudi, are the same god, and we're actually, you know, that winged solar disk, it's the same constellations. Like we can get confirmation from the stars as well.
Mhm.
Even my name, David, has been argued, not originally by me, by other researchers before me, to come from Daoud, which comes from Jehudi. And guess what? In the Bible, I can show you that David is the same constellation as Jehudi, ancient Egypt, in the sky.
Awesome.
There's no doubt that David is that constellation because of specific features in certain stories. Anyway,
Makes perfect sense when you look at the stories and you understand, you know, that you know the Hebrews, their whole story, the entire Old Testament happens in Egypt.
it all comes from, it's all.
So, and there are so many people that are comparing the two languages. Hebrew comes out of ancient hieroglyphs, which Hakim called the language of the Suf. It's Sufi language. Sophia, it's the wisdom from the stars.
Wow.
Everything
There
is
you have it. We're done now. No.
That's enough taste. But yeah, the rest of you have to.
Oh, come on, there's a little more. And of course, once the pharaohs can prove they have the right to rule, they get to sit on the throne and be declared God. They have the power of God on earth. And of course, this is going to relate to so many things. We're going to relate this to the Ark of the Covenant. And it's just, there are so many things and symbols that people don't understand today that can be related to just this understanding. This is the resurrection of mankind, the raising of the dead, the coming back into oneness, fullness, full capacity consciousness. And it's just so exciting. And you know, David, when you mentioned those two rods, I found another image that I took the last time I was at Abydos this past winter. And you can see here is Horus wearing the double crown, handing them. They're totally united to Seti I because he's proving he's done this ceremony and he has the right to rule. So he gets the lotus and the papyrus and the double crown on these serpents, these cobras. And he wears the uraeus to prove that he has been able to come to this great state of consciousness, gnosis.
Wow, that is so powerful. I even see, it looks like he's wearing what they call the blue crown, and I see there's a little tiny spot of blue paint left just at the very base.
Yep. Yep, you're absolutely right. He is.
Blue crown symbolize, Patricia?
Excuse me?
The blue crown, what did it symbolize? I know about the white crown and the red crown, but what did the blue crown represent?
They say it symbolized power, like the tower of the king, which, you know, sort of makes sense. And of course, there were stars on it. So I think, in a way, I think it symbolizes that when you understand our connection, you know, it's what the two hemispheres of the brain really represent are heaven and earth, Upper and Lower Egypt. Kemet referred to, I believe, life in the third dimension. And that's what they called their land. But Osiris was the land. He was the people, and he was what was, you know, he was the earth going through this constant migration of conscious awareness. And I think when you reach that state, when you feel all of the, you feel the oneness of everything that we experience, then you are the powerful one, the one that does have the right to rule, if that makes sense. And this is all related to resurrection. So I showed you the very famous resurrection scene. And you're going to want to, zoom into this image because it's absolutely beautiful. Because you're actually seeing, it's hard to see, but Osiris is on his back. He's on his deathbed. And you see Horus to one side, and then you see there's this bird. Many believe they call it the kite bird, on top of Osiris's phallus, right? Because the story is that, Set, his jealous brother, cuts Osiris into 42 or 14 pieces. And of course, there were 42 districts or divisions of the land of Egypt. So it's speaking to separation consciousness. The land is divided. The people speak different languages. It's Tower of Babel, right? And this is the reuniting. Isis, Osiris's consort, she cries tears that her husband is dead, right? And lying on this deathbed. And she turns into the kite bird and travels up and down the Nile to get all the individuated aspects of Osiris and puts them back together magically, except for the phallus that gets eaten by 2 fish. And I often relate that to possibly the age of Pisces, which we're currently.
So
exactly. So this, of course, is happening in our now moment as we leave the age of Pisces and into Aquarius. And she flaps her wings. And keep in mind, the wings of Isis and her sister Nebhet are the Earth's magnetic field. This is what they represent. So you often see them with their wings around Osiris, because that's our magnetic field that protects us from the fierce galactic radiation, the solar rays. But when that comes down, it lets all that enlightenment in, because we remember we're not our bodies. But again, things we'll talk about. But she flaps her wings to basically breathe life back into Osiris. And so we know then that we have our moment of silence, and then the earth starts spinning again, and Osiris rises. This is the resurrection.
wow.
And here is the image that you showed us. This is the one on the other side of the wall.
Right
This is so beautiful. I do relate this to the Ark of the Covenant, but I'm not going to tell you why right now. But that thing in the center, that pole, that that nail that you spoke about, it has on top of it the head of Osiris. He is now just consciousness in total oneness, unity consciousness, before he moves back into separation. And you see at the bottom, there's just so much here. When you see an image pulled on a sled, and if you see at the very bottom in the red circle, you see the sled, that means that the image can't move on its own. It's not alive. It's having a moment of silence before it starts to move again. And we'll see this in many places in Egypt, all part of the story and part of the cycle. Because if you understand how energy moves, it always moves up and down. When it hits the top peak, there's a moment of silence. These are our solstices in our year. And at noon and midnight every day, we have the feeling or the perception that the sun or the moon stands still for a moment and then begins its journey again. And I would propose that we have those moments of silence in our great year. And we're approaching one right now.
What does that
and here,
Patricia, like in the lived experience, that moment of silence, what does that represent?
In the what?
In the lived experience on Earth.
On Earth. Well, in India, they would call this the great yogic breath. And if you think about how we breathe, you know, and they would do this, you know, with great, you know, they would totally stay in the moment with this breath. You breathe out into separation consciousness. So when we breathe out, when you're done breathing out, there's a moment, a pause. And then you inhale back into your heart, into unity consciousness. And that is this great moment of silence when we feel the oneness. And these are practices that we can do with this imagery in our mind of coming into oneness, of transmuting those two voices in our heads that are telling us conflicting things to do, right? And we bring that, we transmute that energy into that wholeness, that oneness of coming back to center. And that's a great pause. And it's in those pauses that we have our greatest aha moments. You know, there are moments of gnosis. You know, people that having a writer's block or an artist block can breathe that in, that energy back to center, and suddenly they know what they need to do next.
That's so.
I just
When you were saying what I was going to say, what I was going to offer to people listening about a minute ago, you said, if you understand how energy moves, it goes down and pauses, it goes up and pauses. And I was going to offer an example to make it concrete for people. If you heard that and you're saying to yourself, wait a minute. If you think about a surfer going down on a wave, down to the bottom, and then carving back up to the top, they're carved back up to the top in order to be able to go back down it again. There's a pause at the top. So you have to turn around at the top, and all of a sudden you have full potential energy again. You sail down the wave and then you go up. Or a skateboarder, if you think of a skater in a skate park, you know, they're doing those tricks at the top, like where they're grabbing the board or flipping, because it's like that pause, and then they go back down again.
Yeah.
And you can see this in a lot of different, you can see it in dancing, you can see it in anything.
I was kind of asking what it meant for humanity to be at that point where we're just about to, and you've illustrated that very well, to dive into a whole new state of consciousness, a whole new energetic dynamic. Would that be correct?
That's why we all chose to be born now, because we are so close to that moment. It's approaching so quickly, and we all wanted to be here now. We would say, you know, oh my gosh, it's so challenging. You know, we have so many things that, you know, the life has become almost surreal on the planet, right? And there's so much upheaval, chaos, you know, and I like to say that chaos, well, I know it's set. It's set is the divinity that falls into form, and that's chaos. And when we have that moment of silence and we have that moment of complete gnosis, that is like the most magical moment. You know, this is why people say, I don't want to be born into this again. And I say, wow, we lined up for this, because it's experiencing so many different aspects of what consciousness is, what we represent. And when we come back to center, we have those moments of complete bliss. And pure knowing. And when we come out of them, we walk the world in new ways, you know. And I think the next stop after that moment of silence is when we start to rise back into unity consciousness. And that's moving more into the right-brained consciousness again, remembering we're all connected, and we begin to have those years of peace on earth. And what an experience that will be.
Yep. Bring that.
Bring it on. Yeah, for sure. So these resurrection stories in cultures worldwide all speak to this thing that's happening with our perception of reality on this earth-based planet. You know, it all falls into place almost too beautifully. And that's why I think, you know, there is a divinity, there is a divine architect of this construct that we're experiencing. And it's probably the most beautiful thing anyone could imagine. And it's what we're experiencing. And that knowledge helps us to stay in peace amidst the chaos. And this shows you, here is this moment of silence. And here you go, Kesenya, because you're looking at this incredibly, it's a golden shrine. And look at the top row. You have all these exploding, I call them exploding head chakras. It's the cobras, right? With the solar discs on top. But this shows you you're in a place of that highest state of beingness, highest state of consciousness. And this is the bark that's carrying the head of Osiris. That's consciousness itself. And it's that moment of silence before the boat starts to move again. Again, you see those two little images on either side of the, the stand that's holding the head of Osiris, the fetish of Osiris. Powerful, powerful painting. And here's the Osirion, and it's all connected. This is why Seti I, the priest chose to place his temple here, because everything we see, the stories we're going to see in the temple, all point to what this structure was created for. And look at how big those blocks are. And you can see how low, you can't even see ground level. We're looking down into the Osirion here. And right behind the Seti I temple, as David pointed out in his diagrams. This is normally flooded with water, but they've spent several years pumping the water out. And there were times of the year, because the Nile still floods, even though they built the high dam. And, there were times that we used to come down here and there was too much water, so we could only go down the steps a little way. And then parts of the times in the year when we could go down. And then they've closed it now entirely to the public. So we'll be able to go down and spend 2 hours down here. And there's more to the complex than this. And either side, you can go through openings and go into different places. There's a chamber in the very forefront, and then there's a hallway in the back that is more modern, dynastic, but more modern, that has scenes from the Book of Caverns, which speaks to our life in basically physical form. Just some incredible scenes and so much more. So yeah, this is in really incredible. I include this picture on the far right because it shows you that the Osirians once had a roof. So you can see how the blocks would have looked like. This is an artist rendition. But huge, huge blocks. Those blocks in the ceiling are huge. So it would have been covered and incredibly resonant. And if you've ever worked with resonant sound before, it helps to bring you to that 0 point place. We do this in the King's Chamber. There's places on the Giza Plateau where you can go in and tone, and you hit the tone of resonance. And these are times when you can basically heal different parts of your body. You can get through that writer's block, like I was talking about. People have imagined full books. They've gone home and written full books when they're in these moments of complete resonance, or 0 point energy, as some people call it. So I'm trying to build you up to the possibility and my belief in what this structure represents. And you can't even imagine that what we're looking at. They've done some a lot of research into what's underneath, and it actually goes down about 10 stories. It's much more huge and megalithic than what we're even looking at. So you'll be sitting on top of a structure that goes way down into the earth over a pocket of ancestral water. Wow. And this is where they believe, and the mythologies say that the head of Osiris was buried. Now, remember that fetish, the head of Osiris represents our moment of resurrection, our moment of complete gnosis. So now you understand how powerful this place is.
I've got goosebumps. Amazing.
Right.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. And here, go ahead, David.
Well, no, I didn't want to derail your train. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
No.
And you're perfectly okay to say something. I'll remember.
Thanks. Well, I was just going to say, as regards to the head of Osiris, I was watching on the Brothers of the Serpent, some friends of mine from Texas, Kyle and Russ, were there recently, earlier this year, and talking about where that head is traditionally sealed up. And I believe they were saying there's a water lock, or there's the water, you can't get into the entrance to where they believe the head is buried because of the water. I don't know if
That's sort of the water I'm talking about. You can see the picture I'm showing you now shows the way we used to see it at different times of the year. They've been able to drain that water out, but there's still water underneath. And that water it needs to be there. It's very powerful. Even if you're familiar with the Osiris shaft on the Giza Plateau, that bottom chamber is filled with water. This is very important. Remember, before that, the high dam was built in the 1960s. Before that, Egypt was flooded annually with huge Nile floods. And all of these structures are very close to the Nile, so they would have been flooded annually. And if you can envision that flood is the tears of Isis, and she's reconnecting all of the individuated aspects of Osiris with her tears. And that water floods underneath all of the structures, and it brings them back to life. That again is the breath of life, or the breath that Isis breathes into Osiris to restore life. And of course, the agriculture is part of that life. In a three-dimensional reality that stems from the silt that dumps on the riverbanks. There's just so much. We can't include it all in one podcast. But it does connect all the dots, and you get a greater understanding of what it is to be alive in a three-dimensional perception of reality. And in this moment, when I believe we've hit rock bottom, it tells us how we can literally restore ourselves in any given breath. So this is what they're telling us. They're telling us, hey, wake up. Hakeem used to say it. I have a wonderful clip of him just saying it. Wake up. You've got it. You know this. This is within you. Remember who you are. And all this can change in a heartbeat.
That's beautiful.
So good.
So what I want to point out here is that these doorways in the temples, and here in the Osirion, you see this structure, the way the structure is, these doorways represent pi. And even all of the doorways that you see in the tombs, they represent these interdimensional doorways where you can walk from one perception of reality into another. And this is what pi represents. It's that interdimensional number that literally, it's a gateway between the two worlds. This is how the number itself, pi, is described. And there's so much more to that. And again, we'll talk about this. But when you realize, and science has proven this today, when you walk through one of these gateways, even in your own home, you walk through a doorway, you often recognize that sometimes you forget what you had just done in the room before. What did I have for breakfast? And it's because you've moved into another field of energy. It changes the way you perceive in that moment. And it's just a small example of what you can do in some of these areas that are structured to embody this energy.
My friend Brandon always says when he has a shower, he sees himself entering into a portal, and when he creates the life he wants while he's in there in his visualizations, and then steps out of the door of the shower into his new reality.
A new way. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
That's perfect. I'll have to do that.
Yeah, I try to remember.
I like that. And the purification ceremony. You got it all in one shower. That's perfect.
Beautiful, isn't it?
And just quickly, I added this because, Ras Dal is said to be the Giza Plateau, and it's said to be the place of Septepi the first time. I don't know why I put an extra P in that. Typo. But anyway, it's the doorway between materiality and non-materiality. And this is what the Sphinx Tefnut represents, and even the pyramid structures themselves embodied. If the Great Pyramid circumference is divided twice by twice the apex height of the pyramid, we get pi. These pyramids are pi. So when we go into the pyramid, we have that opportunity, as I mentioned before, with resonance, to move through these doorways of perception. This is huge opportunities to really get to know yourself, to make, as Kesenya just pointed out, you walk into these portals and you can change who you are. You know, you can release all the things that no longer serve you and create an entirely new, a new journey, a new path to walk.
I was thinking,
And that's what I believe the Osirion was. Sorry, David.
I was just going to say, when you were saying about we're living in this very strange time, and yet you said, well, we chose to come into time at this time, or we incarnated, and maybe this trip to Egypt is part of you chose to
come and be part
maybe
of
it's part of it.
Yeah.
I was thinking about saying it, and I said, oh, that sounds too salesy or markety or PT Barnum, but really it's not. It's not. And when
it's not.
It made me realize, this might be what you're supposed to do if you're listening.
I love that you said that, David, because every tour, when the group finally meets and gets to know each other and they see all the connections they have with each other, and I always say, you all decided to be here now and have this journey together, so that when they choose to come, and Egypt usually calls the person, it calls you when you're meant to be here. It brings you here. I wanted to come to Egypt my whole life, but I waited until I call it my voice, my heart, my whatever. It always tells me what I need to do next. And when it told me, I got here, but when you choose to come, you also choose who you're going to be with and how you're going to experience it. And so the groups that come form these magical bonds. Many stay friends for years and years, but you create a magic together that opens doors. Every group opens different doors, and it's always amazing. Doors that are normally locked, suddenly a keeper comes up and says, hey, you want to go see this? I have the keys today. It's just always a magical experience. And, even though I've been doing this for, 16 years almost, every tour I go on, I'm always excited and I'm always learning new things. That's how the temples communicate with you. So, if you're even thinking about coming, ask your inner selves, and be aware of that discussion with yourself and your dreams. And if in any way you're called to come to Egypt, we'd certainly love to have you. But yeah, please sign up soon so we can, you can make sure you get a space. So here, what I've done is I'm showing you a picture. This is a papyrus, a pen and ink of a papyrus of the resurrection scene of Osiris. So under that serpent that you see in the center, you see, there's the Simateli. See, David, I told you everything you included.
Amazing. I just want to emphasize that we did not coordinate our presentations. I just thought, I'll throw a couple of slides together of what really, strikes me, and then I'll hand it over to Patricia. And sure enough, this is just
amazing.
It's incredible. So yeah, it is that. It is what you were drawn to that imagery because, also because you made this decision to come to Egypt, and it is going to be, I think, an integral part of your experience there, because that imagery is everything, as I just happen to be pointing out. The Simatali is one of my favorite symbols, and it's one of the most ancient symbols in Egypt. And the little image of the Simatali that I have on the left kind of shows you that beauty of the lotus and the papyrus, and forming that knot around the imagery of the lungs and the voice box and the heart, and this moment of resurrection. And on top, you see Osiris over the serpent in the back to the pen and ink. You see Osiris sitting on the throne, and there's Thoth or Jehudi in front of him, handing him all the scepters of power, because he is now the resurrected. He's on top. And what I know about the Osirion is they used to have processions from some of the, definitely I know of the one ancient tomb, which was from a second dynasty king named Jed. But other tombs as well, they had processions where they would celebrate this resurrection, and they would start there and come into the Osirion and again do ceremony. And I want to point out that underneath the floor in the Osirion is 2 stairways that go down like that.
Wow.
So will we be in that place of resurrection? That whole experience, to me, this was a place that I believe the very ancients were able to walk between the worlds. Just putting that out there. Here you can see the 2 stairways. This up here is the top. You see the little doorways to the other hallways. This is the chamber that you couldn't see. This is the tunnel. And up here, all the way up here, and I'm up on the top image now, is on the far right is the Seti I temple. You see how far down the Osirion is? Wow. This speaks to its age. Hakeem would say, when people asked how old it was, he'd say it's not about time, because we measured, and I came to the same conclusion myself, that, we measure time in terms of form, because we're in physical form. But if we have moments when we're formless, and it's just, I don't think, a year is always the same perception as it is. Just like our days can seem shorter now than the time seems to go faster or slower, I think, at different ages and stages of consciousness. But he would say, measure how many times the silt was laid on the Nile, and that would determine an annual flood, not necessarily in years, but in cycles. And this is the way the ancients saw everything, in cycles. And at any rate, how many layers of silt were laid that they had to dig out, and they haven't even gone down the 10 stories that the structure actually embodies. So to me, this absolutely looks like the resurrection scene, but the primeval mound surrounded by primordial waters. And the story, even in the building text, Edfu building text, talks about, and every temple seems to talk about this understanding that, the structures emerge from the flood waters that start to recede. That's the mound, the primeval mound. And that story is told all over the world. The flood waters recede after the, catastrophic event. And suddenly the world begins anew. And you see what's interesting in the Edfu text is they talk about the pole, right? The pillar, the papyrus plant that emerges on the mound, and Horus, or the bird, comes to light on it. And that sort of relates to the Noah story, when he sends the bird out and the bird, comes back with the twig.
That's amazing.
I just see so many. Sorry, please, David.
You said this absolutely looks like the primeval mound. The mound, you're drawing the arrow to the bottom diagram and the arrow to the upper diagram. And I totally agree that those, not only that, but if I were holding that papyrus in my hand and I were facing the Osirion from the other side, the serpent that's going up would look like he's ending up in the Seti complex of Abydos up above. It's that,
right.
that serpent in the sky, on the cover of John Anthony West's seminal book, Serpent in the Sky, he has that same serpent going up.
Yeah.
It's almost as if you were using that as your map and looking at it from the other side, or just, you know, reversed it, it would, the serpent would go right up to the level of where the later,
Steady one is.
yeah, the
Wow.
19th dynasty. I'm
Great connection. I like it. I like the way you think. Most
sure
definitely.
sure is a lot lower down, as you said, or as Hakeem was saying about the layers of silt.
And keep in mind too, I just, looking closer behind Osiris on the throne, you see the two ladies, right? Nebhet could be a version of Isis. And if remember that they have the wings. They're the ones that surround us with the magnetic field. And this is what you see on the Arks of the Covenant, the cherubim on either side with the wings. So this is why I make all these connections. This moment of resurrection, I believe, is what the Ark of the Covenant is all about. This moment when you're at oneness, that tepi, and then everything spins into reality. And I believe that's what the Ark is all about. It has the manna, it has the Aaron's rod, and Aaron can be likened to Shu. So many things to talk about on the tour.
All
But
those
that rod,
too. I can give you celestial evidence to back up what you're saying.
I love it.
I won't go into it, but everything that you're saying, it's the same constellations of the pivot scene in the Ark of the Covenant, and the holding up of the two rods, when Aaron and Aaron and Hur, I think, are holding up the arms of Moses while Joshua is doing the battle. Those whole
Beautiful.
stars, and they're using the same the constellations back up what you're saying is what I'm.
Fantastic. Well, it's funny because Aaron, well, there's lots, yes, definitely the relationship. And like you said, Shu holds up the heavens, and you're pointing out that Aaron does. So that's awesome.
Yeah, Geb, Shu, and Newt is again the same constellation. So, and here's a constellation.
Yeah.
I'll let you take it from there. That's fantastic.
So cool. We have so many things to compare notes on. And that's what really excites me about this tour, and having you both come, that again, that what we all bring and the different aspects of our field of knowing is just an incredible combination. Now this comes from Freddie Silva. He's done some work on the Osirion, relating it to Cygnus. And he says that Deneb and Cygnus on the winter solstice of 10,500 BC, which again was that last, it's when so many people are saying was that last catastrophic moment, the last moment of silence before we emerged. And it's seen from the front entrance to the rear of the Osirion. So sort of the same picture that I showed you in the beginning from that direction. And there you see Cygnus descending, but possibly relating to this moment of resurrection. And he relates to Isis to being Cygnus as the kite bird, which is quite possible. That the vulture is also Cygnus in ancient Egypt, but there could be a relationship here with that moment of resurrection, because it just seems to be that perfect mirror for everything we're talking about, because the time periods and within the precession of the equinoxes makes sense.
Yeah, I've absolutely.
And actually, yeah, sorry, Gerald Massey made that connection with the kite bird as Cygnus. Sorry, go ahead, David.
I was just going to say there's a diagram, or there's an ancient Egyptian painting of Isis in her kneeling position with her wings out. She's kneeling with her wings out.
Yes.
Very much mirrors the constellation of Cygnus in that. And
oh wow.
Yeah, I've said that that's a connection for sure in the past. So I would agree with what you're saying there.
It makes perfect sense to me. Now, Isis is also Sirius. I have some interesting things I want to talk to you about where I believe, Sirius comes into play in the whole scheme of things in precession as well. There's just so many things we need to look at closer. Because there is some really deep, profound things that we can bring forward.
Sure. And just before we leave this, just really quickly, in the Plutarch account of Isis and Osiris, she is she turns herself into a kite and flits around the pillar. And the pillar, I've argued in my 2019 book, Ancient Worldwide System, where I have chapters on the Egyptian myth, that not only is Osiris associated with Orion, of course, everybody knows about the arguments for Sa, SA, Orion, Osiris.
Yes.
He can clearly be shown to be connected to Ophiuchus, which is right next to. Yes. So she's flitting around when he's in the tree, and then Plutarch even says she wraps a winding sheet around him. I make some arguments that he's connected to Ophiuchus, and all those images that you keep showing of the Semitawi and the head of Osiris on the top of the, the turning stick or the nail, it is all additional confirmation of a connection between Osiris and Ophiuchus, as well as Osiris and Orion, and therefore she's flitting around as a kite. Cygnus is right next to in the Milky Way there, just as you see it. So
100%. I have been having all of those feelings as well. And yes, Ophiuchus is actually who Osiris ascends as. That's Horus. In that Horus in his highest aspect is Ophiuchus in that moment. And that's who Orion actually, well, not Orion, but Osiris becomes at the end of his journey. I mean, that's the whole point of the journey, is to get to Ophiuchus.
I can't wait to talk with you about all these things. This is going to be so wonderful.
Truly, truly. And we have reached the end of my slides, but I would love to include more. I could talk all day, but I know we both have so much to do. And the whole idea, we could do these podcasts. I think we'll even do a lot more after we get together on the tour. But this is going to be a tour, a journey of discovery. And it's always exciting to be part of that experience. And I also want to point out that the people that join us always they bring in a whole different understanding, new eyes, everyone sees and interacts with these temples in their own unique individual way. I was lucky to meet up with an old friend and her son during the December solstice period. We went to Luxor for a week, and we're at Karnak for the rising of the sun down the center path. Her 9-year-old son was running around pointing things out. He would take photos and come say, "See, Patricia, look." That would be amazing things. New eyes, new ways of seeing things will enlightens everybody.
I so agree with all the different in-person events that we do. It's that mixture of all the different people with all their different gifts and life experiences. And I even, because I have to relate everything to a myth, but there's this myth in ancient Norse myths, just like in the churning of the heaven, or the battles between the Olympian gods and the Titans, in the big gigantomachy scenes, or these battles, these heavenly battles. In the Norse myths, there is a primordial battle between the Aesir or Aesir gods and the Vanir gods, where they battle. And then when they have a truce, they do this kind of truce ritual where they make a big vat, and all the different gods and goddesses from the Aesir side and the Vanir side, they spit into this vat. It's kind of strange. But out of the spit of all of them spitting together rises this being called Kvasir, who is a wisdom, a god of wisdom. And later Kvasir gets drowned in a thing of mead, and then it's this whole twisted story. But I think that imagery of all the different gods and goddesses spitting into a vat and mixing together, out comes wisdom. In other words, something more than any of us can do individually rises up out of this confluence of us all getting together and spitting. But we need everybody on the trip for
I like the metaphor.
Yeah, what arises.
Yeah, but it's a great image for exactly what can and does happen at these events. So definitely, because you're there, you're at the temples and you're relating these things and you're looking at it and you're like, oh wow, I never saw that. And the next thing you know, you build into something really beautiful. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm just praying for all the people who are meant to be on this trip to get the means and the capacity and the time to be able to join us, because we need, this could even be a reconnection of souls from past lives in familiar territory.
Exactly, 100%.
It's really exciting. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm excited and I can't wait to share more with everybody who comes on the trip at the time.
The cycles.
Definitely.
We'll be exploring the turning cycles of the heavens with our.
Yeah. Well, I have to say we have a great group that's forming already. Some of the people coming, they're so excited and they bring so many different ways of looking at things. They bring their own levels of expertise. So a great group is forming. There is still space available. You don't want to wait too long to sign up. So please let us know you're interested and we can answer any questions for you.
Love it.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for what you've shared with us today. I was really invigorated by it. I can't wait for what more is going to come out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we hope to see you there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.